hopefully that confirmed that it's recording. Yep, there we go. Perfect. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and Happy New Year. Hopefully this is a good way to start the year off, because we're joined by Simon Martin today, who has joined Aviva halfway through last year as our technical development manager, and we're delighted to be able to share Simon's expertise with you all today, because we really want Simon to help advisors that we work with, Julian Harris being an important strategic relationship for Aviva. We want to make sure you're benefiting from the expertise that Simon now brings to us. So Simon's here to talk to us about the 2025 budget and have a look at what opportunities that come from that and what sort of things you should be thinking about. And hopefully that helps you start the new year off with lots of really good ideas and things that you should be thinking of to plan for the year ahead. We will have time for questions at the end, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye out on those. If it's appropriate to ask him in throughout the presentation, I'll do so, but we will probably try and save them for the end. And then also, if anyone wants to actually ask their question, feel free to put your hand up also, and we'll get to you at the end as well. So I will hand over to Simon now, who will be presenting to you today, and then I will come back again for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat, and good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. Hope you all had a great break over Christmas. As Kat said, my role within Aviva is the technical development manager, so I look after the technical side of planning, particularly as we relate to our kind of key and strategic accounts, looking at things like taxation, trusts, planning, but really focused on kind of what's happening in the market, what we've seen, what opportunities that can kind of present for us as a business. My background was at Technical Connection, where I worked for a number of years before moving across last summer to start this role. So the purpose of today's session is really a bit of a dive into the 2025 budget, but with a real focus on planning, because you can go and read and look at what happened, what was said, all that kind of stuff. You can do that, but what I'm going to try and do a bit more of today is analysis, firstly, and secondly, kind of try and answer that question, or let's get thinking, what could it mean for clients? What opportunities will it present? What needs do we have? I mean, for me, the last two budgets, whilst they were pretty monumental in a lot of ways, particularly 2024 in my opinion, but they were pretty monumental, but I genuinely see them as some I'm doing a similar session soon, and I've called it reasons to be cheerful. I think there's genuinely lots of reasons to be cheerful for the financial planning profession, because as we'll see, things have got more complicated, and things are going to get likely more tax heavy for a lot of clients, particularly investors. And therefore the need for what we can do and what we can deliver to clients, I just think will grow and grow. So let's think about this as a real opportunity to deliver real value to clients, to open up opportunities, to help them through the sometimes anxieties that will be created. So whilst it's easy to see this sometimes as a bit of a challenge, I think there's tons of opportunity, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to look, the learning objectives are going to be looking at the budget 2025 changes, clearly articulate them, make sure everyone's really, really comfortable with that. Look at the impact of those on clients' plans. We'll pull in a little bit from 2024 as well. And for me, 2024 was the outline changes that I think are going to have the most structural impact on how planning is done, particularly with pensions and inheritance tax. That will open up a lot of conversations. And we'll look at some planning ideas. We'll look at some planning ideas that you can use to support your clients through these changes. And as I said right at the start, and always be the case, we as a business are here to support you, and there's lots that we can continue to do. So let's have this as the start of a conversation, not the end, because we've got guys from our team on the call. There's myself, Kat. We're here to support you as a business. So let's keep the conversation going, because I'll be talking probably for about 35-40 minutes or so. There's only so much we can cover. There's lots more content that we can we can go through with you. So look, the 2025 budget, we're going to look at a couple of things. I think for me, the first bit to remember is The build up to the budget. Now, I've been around, a fairly long time now in this industry, and I can't remember a budget with quite as much rumour as this one. Maybe the year before perhaps was the same, but this was felt like an endless stream of rumour, didn't it, as you were building up? I'm sure you all had clients say to you, oh, should I take my tax-free cash before the budget? Should I do this? Are they going to put up income tax rates? And a lot of those things were thrown around. There was talk of flat rate tax relief on pensions. Might that come in? There was talk of capping pension commencement lump sums. At one point, not that long before the announcements, there was talk of increasing the income tax rates and reducing the thresholds. There was changes to inheritance tax that had been mooted. Was it going to be 10 years more than 7 years? Were there going to be the gifts from income exemption be pulled around? There was so much stuff going on. And for me, that's important to remember for two main reasons. First of all, many of the most onerous changes didn't come in, tax-free cash and pension upfront tax relief. Those things that people value are still there. So it's important, I think, to remind clients that there's still some really, really valuable tax allowances and tax exemptions that can be used. I also think it's really important just to reiterate the value of advice, the value of the advice that you deliver to clients, which is, had you taken tax-free cash or had the client taken tax-free cash because they're worried about it being removed and it wasn't, that may not have delivered the best outcome for them. I think it's really, really important just to remind clients of the benefit of, not acting on rumour, not acting on conjecture, waiting until the facts come out and build it into their plan. And for me, that's one of the big values, the value that you provide in advice. The advice value is greater than just funds and products and all that kind of stuff. It's helping them make good decisions and ultimately sometimes stopping them make really bad decisions. And rarely do great outcomes come from, working on rumour. So that's just another opportunity just to reiterate to clients, this is the value that you have when you seek advice, when you sit with you, when they do some planning, and that's really, really important. The other thing that's also important as you start to think about the budget is sometimes helping clients take a step back, because when a big budget announcement or a big budget comes out and there's some significant announcements, it's really, really easy to get hung up on certain points. I think a classic example of that would be, I might get hung up on the changes to the agricultural relief, and you'd say to me, are you a farmer? And I'd say, no. Have you ever been a farmer? No. Will you ever be a farmer? Pretty unlikely now. Let's bring it to life. Let's really distill the changes down to the impact they have on clients. So helping them ask questions like, are you still on track to reach your objectives following the budget? If I wanted to retire age 60 with £40,000 a year income, can I still do that following the budget changes? That's the critical one. Do I need to make any changes? Is there anything that I need to do differently as a consequence? It's a great thing for them to think about, because both of the recent budgets are dropping in changes over in the next few tax years in various forms. So as you go along, there might be things you need to do. The final one is to help them think about opportunities. Again, you'll be very, very familiar with this, but it might be that the budget changes have resulted in someone needing to do more inheritance tax planning than perhaps they would have otherwise done. And that will probably be the case for a lot of clients. But how can that be brought alive? An opportunity for someone, it might be, yes, inheritance tax has driven it, but do you know what? I can pay for all of my grandkids to get through university. I can get my grandkids on the property ladder. I can really make a difference to my family's life, and helping people bring that alive is really, really important. So there's some value, I think, in helping them bring the budget changes into into their own world and making sure it's really understood from that perspective. And that's the value of advice that you see time and time again. So let's have a look at the changes. Let's have a look at what the major changes were. The big one that was kind of announced within our profession is the changes to salary sacrifice. I think is going to be a huge one. Salary sacrifice is no longer going to be free of national insurance above £2,000 from April 2029. Anything above that will be liable to employee and employer national insurance. Now, we're going to bring this to life when we look at some planning ideas with a case study. But this has focused the mind for a lot of people in terms of pension contributions. And I think there's two things to remember as we'll look at. Number one, pensions, the upfront tax relief for individuals is still going to be incredibly attractive even after 2029. And second of all, if you've got people who are interested in salary sacrifice, front loading over the next 3 years is potentially going to be sensible for them, because April 2029 is still a fair way away. So there's opportunities, but we'll look at that some more. That was a big one. That was a big one. If you take nothing else away from that, remember that pensions are not dead as a consequence of this. It's still a very, very attractive way of funding retirement. We've also seen the income tax bands frozen until April 2031. Now, I know there might be some people in Scotland who operate under slightly different tax rules, but fundamentally all the tax bands have been frozen until April 2031. This is, according to the government's own figures, the change that's going to create the most additional tax revenue. The frozen nil rate bands are quite clever because you don't feel like it's a tax rise, but as income generally increases, either through inflationary rises or escalation or pay rises or promotions or whatever it might be, as people move through the tax bands, the amount that's in the relative tax bands obviously increases. People get pushed into higher bands quite quickly. This will be a really, really significant tax rise. The one that I think will start to really bite a lot of people is the £100,000 personal allowance threshold, at which point you start to lose your personal allowance. And that number has been frozen, or it's been 100k since its inception in 2010. So that'll be 21 years of 100,000. Now, £100,000 income obviously is a big income, but it's a much less significant income in 2031 than it would have been in 2010. The numbers of people who are caught with that is going to be increased. I think that will become a key planning pinch point and a key opportunity for people who start to push through that threshold, because 2031 is still over 5 years away. 5 years of 4 or 5% pay rises excuse me, plus a promotion in there somewhere. We're going to see a lot of people, I think, caught with that. We've seen the ISA changes. The ISA changes were kind of pre-announced almost. It was not a surprise that they did that. And fundamentally what they want is people to invest more than they save, was kind of the argument that the Chancellor put across. If you watched the speech, you might remember that she said, if you'd have invested in the stocks and shares ISA, she had an example. Basically, she said you'd be around about £50,000 better off now than if you'd have kept it in cash. Again, I think that's a great news story for us, for what we do, which is to help clients understand risk and return and reward, and making sure that they fully understand the negatives and positives of each investment opportunity, and cash being feeling safe, but the impact of inflation means that it's not always the best place to hold money. And that said, if you're over 65, you still get the full £20,000 allowance, and if you're under 65, you've got £12,000 per person. Therefore, a couple, 24,000. There's probably not that many people under 65 who are saving more than £2,000 a month into cash, but there will be some. So that'll be one to look out for. And we've seen the property tax, the mansion tax as it's called, effectively acting like almost like a second council tax that sits on top for valuable properties. Again, what that looks like will remain to be seen. But will people move? Will people downsize? The answer is possibly. It depends. Time will tell. What else did we see? What else is out there? Well, there's effectively a blanket increase of savings, property and dividend increase. Roughly speaking, is 2 percentage points in all the tax bands. So property income, so rental properties, the new tax rates will be 22, 42, 47, so up 2 percentage points. And where that will catch a lot of people out are people who've got borrowing, because you might remember a few years back they brought in some rules around not being able to fully offset borrowing costs against rent. That can create some tax spikes if you're not careful. So that's an interesting one. Dividend changes mean that the basic and higher, but not the additional rate, are going up by 2 percentage points, and equally savings income going up as well. So generally speaking, across the board, a tax rise. a couple of points to think about, particularly in dividend taxes. A lot of dividends are paid by or received by people who are owner managed businesses. So there'll be some conversations probably around how could or should I pay myself? Is my remuneration structure the most appropriate? And again, it's a good conversation to get people thinking, is it going to be better to do something slightly different? And that comes in a couple of months' time. So generally speaking, across this group, people who are savings and living off savings and investments will perhaps need to just be cautious that the tax increase doesn't hit them too hard, and we'll look at some key planning ideas and opportunities for that. Last couple of things to look at: employee ownership trusts was a significant change. So you used to be able to sell your business to an employee ownership trust if you could meet all the rules, and you used to get 100% capital gains tax relief, i.e. you paid zero. You now get 50% relief, so you pay half the CGT that you would have otherwise paid, and that was immediate. A couple of small changes, one of which was I think very needed, which was the business relief and agricultural relief allowance. Was $1 million, now it's $1 million for businesses, but $2.5 million for farmers and agriculture. That can be transferred between spouses if unused. Previously they said they wouldn't allow it. Now they've brought it into line with all the other inheritance tax bands. And we've also seen the current IHT thresholds frozen, easy for me to say, until 2031, with also one additional year. It was 2030. Again, the last time that was unfrozen was 2009. So we're going to have 22 years of frozen bands, 22 years of 325k nil rate band. Yes, we've had the residence nil rate band. The £2 million taper is also frozen. This will, in my opinion, bring lots of people into inheritance tax. I think inheritance tax will become a really, really important conversation in years to come. So that's the changes. Hopefully that's given you a good overview of what's happening, what's been happening. The bigger question is, though, what does it mean? What kind of planning ideas, what kind of thoughts and opportunities are there for clients? And for me, unlike the 2024 budget, there's nothing in here really that's going to structurally change what someone does. All it does is increases the value and the impact of the things that you were already doing. So 2024 was a big change. We'll touch on that in a moment, particularly around pensions and decumulation. But 2025 effectively didn't structurally change too much. It just increased the value of what we've done. So back to the starting point, which is the need for advice is going to be significant, in my opinion. Helping clients understand the personal impact and whether their plan still works is really, really important. But there are some specifics. The income tax freeze is going to be the biggest tax raiser, according to the OBR, and 8 billion of additional revenue they're hoping to get from that. So what kind of things could we be thinking about? I think the attractiveness of pensions becomes really, really important. The upfront tax relief, the impact on the adjusted net income is going to be hugely important. The ability to plan for the £100,000 taper, I can see a whole industry being built around that as people push towards that limit. Using pensions, using other planning is really, really important. Simple things like ISAs become important. If you've got income which is taxable in some form or other, getting that into an ISA, making sure you're disciplined with doing that every year, all becomes important. Things like the exemptions, the allowances, all those sorts of things, making sure you use them are really, really important. Good kind of hygiene, things like getting your spouse or the right spouse to own the assets is really important. I'm sure you've seen it time and time again where the higher rate taxpayers got the wrong assets in their name and they've never thought about transferring it across. I also think there'll be an interesting conversation on investment bonds. I think investment bonds relative attractiveness will increase because of the ability to defer tax. So if someone is, pushing the upper echelons of higher rate or getting towards 100k, investing in a bond and holding it, wait till they retire when their income becomes lower, is going to be attractiveness. That tax control is important. Therefore, nothing structurally different, but the value of the planning tools that you have is going to increase. ISA is equally an interesting one. Now, the purpose of the ISA change was to encourage clients to think about, or individuals to think about, investing rather than saving. that is going to be a really important part of it. So investing rather than saving. So I think it's a great opportunity. She's opened a door for us to speak to clients and talk about, is cash still the right thing to do? Our Chancellor is on board with the concept of investing. Are they, undertaking the right levels? Is there risk conversation level? Now, it might be someone says that cash is right for them, and therefore they'll use their ISA and they'll keep the rest outside of an ISA and just accept there's a tax hit. But I think there'll be some that think actually putting money into investment is going to be the right thing, for all the reasons that the Chancellor herself outlined. And I also think there's a conversation around maximising between now and 2027 when the changes come in, just good annual tax year planning. But for me, pensions remain an incredibly important part of planning. The upfront tax relief was not removed, so for higher and additional rate taxpayers, that's really, really important. We'll touch on salary sacrifice in a moment because there's some lots of thinking around that. But for me, the upfront tax relief is where we start, and also the knock-on effects of using pensions. For example, you might say, well, because of the salary sacrifice changes, I won't do it anymore, and you then lose your child benefit or tax-free childcare. The 100k threshold has both personal allowance and tax-free childcare within it. So again, really, really important. And also, I think in the build up to 2029, that gives us a kind of, there will be a change in April 2029. So where appropriate, funding pensions between now and then, I think is going to be a conversation, if nothing else. I've been of the view since the 2024 budget that inheritance tax is going to be probably the key piece of planning that needs to be done for clients over the coming years. The frozen bands for another year will catch another big group of people. We've had the pensions brought in, we've had restrictions on businesses and farms. I think inheritance tax planning will become the default planning for a lot of people, particularly advised clients. Many advised clients, obviously I'm speculating somewhat, but most, I think, advised clients will need to start thinking about inheritance tax planning in one form or other. So getting comfortable with, gifting, trusts, using, investment bonds in trust, taking money from pensions, using tax-free cash well, lots and lots to think about from an inheritance tax perspective. And again, we've done a huge amount of work on that. I'm really happy to, to work with you and support you with that. And, the businesses are an important one. I think ultimately the big one to think about is, if you have a lot of business owner clients, is the remuneration structure. The increased dividend tax means that it's worth looking at. Do they need to pay themselves in a different way? Obviously, the business relief allowance can be transferred, which is handy because otherwise they'd have had to go through and put trusts in their will to crystallize the allowance on first death, and it gets a little bit complicated. But ultimately, that's a bit of good news for them. And again, buy-to-let savings investors and dividend investors, what's the right approach for them? Well, I think ultimately using allowances, using exemptions, and doing things that way is going to be vital. So lots and lots to think about. And there's also the thought of what might come next. We don't know what the next budget, they said there's going to be some kind of spring statement. So again, that'll probably set hairs running in terms of what's going to change. They're going to do something. But actually, I think there's an opportunity just to deliver a bit of calm to clients and say, look, we don't know what's going to change. Things might change. They might get better. They might get worse. We don't know yet. But make sure, based on the rules today, you're maximizing your position. While you've got dividend allowances, pension allowances, ISA, etc., 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 use them properly. And I think it's a great question was, if you lost one allowance, what would be the most painful? Well, actually, it's pension tax relief. Okay, well, let's make sure we use that. Even things like, might there be inheritance tax changes? We just don't know. So, based on the rules as are today, making sure we utilize them is really, really important. So I've got two case studies now to just to quickly walk through, just to show the impact on a couple of the main changes on individuals. The first one Angelo demonstrates the impact of a frozen inherent income tax bands against a rising income, and then we'll look at an example that talks about the impact of salary sacrifice and the changes coming in 2029. So as I've mentioned, the income tax threshold's all frozen until 2031. And we're going to look at what that means to Angela, who is a high earner. So Angela has got an income of £95,000. That comes in every year, £95,500. And he's looking forward 5 years from April 2026. And we're going to look at the impact of a 5% annual pay rise for Angelo and the impact that it has on his income tax bill. So you have to trust me with the numbers. The current tax year, the end of the current tax year, he's got an income of 97,500. That means he's got a full personal allowance because he's below 100. He's got 83,000 taxable, just over, pays it basic rate and higher rate income tax, and his tax bill is 26,432. That's as it stands at the moment. No pension, no nothing, just taking all of his income as income. Fairly straightforward. If his income rises at 5% a year, every year for the next 5 years, by the time he gets to 2031-32 tax year, his income will have reached £125,000. That's rounded to the nearest thousand for simple maths. That means he's got a tiny, tiny bit of personal allowance left. He's abated almost all of it because he's exceeded 100k. Therefore, almost all of his income is taxable, and he pays, the basic rate tax, no personal allowance, and his higher rate tax bill is quite significant. So his tax bill has gone, or will go, from 26,000 to 42,000 just as a consequence of this freeze. So it means that, for him, that's going to be quite a significant change. So the question is, what could he do? Well, there's a number of things he can do. And as we'll see as we go through, none of them are mind-bogglingly clever. Apologies if that's what you're hoping. Actually, I think for these kind of scenarios, the simple structural planning that people have always done is going to add even more value. So first of all, what's the impact on him? He might say, do you know what? That still gives me enough money in the bank every year to live. I'm comfortable in my life. I'll pay a bit more tax. Who cares? And, that might be the view of some people. I think pensions for upfront tax relief, once you're between 100 and 125, becomes incredibly important because you get a 40%, effectively 40% tax impact on that. So, and even better if you can do salary sacrifice till 2029. Getting that income down is going to be important if you can afford it. Any savings income he's got, get that into ISAs, get it into the right distribution with his spouse, because let's assume his spouse is a non-taxpayer and some of his income is savings income. Well, it's better to move that across. And also, if he's looking at investing, a non-income producing asset, maybe an investment bond, maybe some kind of GIA, which is capital growth focused, is going to be impactful for him, because what he doesn't really want is any more income. So again, nothing that will make you say, wow, that's a dramatic change, but specific, careful, good planning will make a big difference to someone in that scenario. And let's have a look at case study 2 now. So Georgina, we're going to look at the impact of the changes to salary sacrifice and try and answer the question, does this mean salary sacrifice is dead? From 2029, is salary sacrifice a dead duck? Let's have a look. So from 2029, as you've seen, any contribution above salary sacrifice above £2,000 will be liable to both employee and employer national insurance. Really, what I got from the budget was this is trying to stop people who basically put their whole bonus into their pension every year as a means of avoiding, legitimately, of course, income tax and national insurance. So let's have a look at the impact for this on Georgina. So she has 150k salary and she's built up a pension pot of 300k, and she's decided to do a 50k salary sacrifice, which is increased by 15%. So she's got a very benevolent employer who says to her, look, we were going to pay that 15% if you took it as salary. So we'll take that 15 and we'll pop that into your pension, because for us it's the right thing to do, because we'll make it even to you. So her salary, if she did nothing, if she said, I'm going to not do a pension, I've just outlined very briefly her income tax position. So she pays 53k income tax, 5k employee national insurance, and her take-home pay is just over £91,000. If she put £50,000 into her pension via salary sacrifice, as you'll see, there's a big impact on her income tax. Her employee national insurance goes down a little bit because she's a high rate taxpayer, so she only gets 2%. And her employer tops that up by 15%, i.e. £7,500. Now, as you look at that, you'd say that's a very, very attractive piece of tax planning for her. Effectively, that pension contribution of 57,500 has cost her just over 22,500. So you imagine you said to a client, I've got an investment that will turn 22,500 to 57,500 overnight. They'd probably say, where do I sign? Now, I know there's a bit of added complexity. You've got to take the money out, you've got to pay income tax on the way out and so on. But fundamentally saying it will cost you 22,500 and a bit to get 57,500 into your pension looks very, very attractive. And hence, it's a very, very common piece of planning. So what does it look like post 2029? Now, for the purposes of this, I've kept the numbers flat. Whilst the likelihood is there'd be some escalation, I've kept them flat just to make it, just to give it as much clarity as possible. So at the moment, her scenario looks like that. She sacrifices 50, her income's 100, income tax NI as before. So let's have a look at the position after the changes in 2029. So her income tax is unchanged. She loses her employee national insurance benefit on 48,000 of her pension contribution. Therefore, she pays 2% NI on 48,000. As a result, her employee national insurance goes up by £960. And the big change, though, is the employer national insurance saving that's lost. The employer will only get £300 employee national insurance, i.e. 15% on 2,000, as opposed to 7,500 that they used to get. So the big hit here for salary sacrifice is not necessarily the employee, but the employer. The employer national insurance is far more significant, particularly when you're talking about higher and additional rate taxpayers, because it's only 2%. So a position previously was 57,500 cost of 22,500, roughly speaking. Now it's just over 23,500 cost with additional 960, gets her 50,300. So even though the position has worsened or will worsen come 2029, it's still a very attractive proposition in my mind. 23,500 to 50,300 overnight is a very, very attractive proposition. So I think the message for individuals to think about is two things. Number one, salary sacrifice is by no means dead. You know, her contribution still remains attractive. Her employer could still provide national insurance savings. So there's two things. Now, salary sacrifice, I think, still will be an interesting way to plan, because yes, the national insurance it won't be as good naturally, but you do get the tax relief up front, and that's going to be attractive to people. You don't have to wait to January, do your tax return, all that kind of rigmarole that most people don't want to do. You get the tax relief up front. So salary sacrifice, I think, will still be an attractive piece of planning post 2029. Second of all, maximize it before 2029 where appropriate. There will be some people who say, I'm going to go to town on it now because I've got the cash flow to do it, and I'm going to lessen it in 2029. You know, that's a great conversation to have based on individual clients. And I think it's also important to remember, you know, I've spoken extensively today about the tax impact of it, but it's a retirement plan. You know, yes, there's taxation, but really people don't buy into pensions. Most people don't buy into pensions for tax relief. They buy into them because it means they can retire when they want, with the amount of money they need to do the things they want to do. So, you know, let's not forget that as well, because that's ultimately what we're giving Georgina, which is the amount of money she needs to retire when she wants to do the things that she wants to do. So lots to think about, but I think a really interesting conversation will be coming up over the next few years. And we can't talk about this budget though without talking to the previous one. There were some, as I said, very, very significant changes. The biggest of which, I think, pensions being brought into the inheritance tax net from 2027. That's a real structural change. The days of pensions being an intergenerational plan, I think will cease. the idea of people who said, "Oh, I'll leave my pension alone and live off my other assets," I think will flip, particularly because the pension will be liable to inheritance tax, and then if you die after 75, income tax on the way out, ending up with these kind of 66, 68% tax rates. The purpose behind the legislation was we want people to use their pension as a pension, not as an intergenerational trust fund. I think it will have that effect. So I think we'll see people drawing pension income, and then their other assets they were going to live off, actually they don't need. Therefore, there's going to be needs to think about planning, gifting, inheritance tax, and so on. I think there'll also be people who draw income that they genuinely don't need. The great news is they've left the gift from income exemption in full, so people can draw their pension income and give it and get it out using the exemption. Maybe buy whole of life, maybe gift to their kids to put into their pensions, gift into trust on a regular basis. Lots to think about. The annuity conversation again is another one. Do I take money out of my pension as an annuity, because that gets the IHT value down to nil, but it means there's nothing left at the end. So what's the right thing to do? It's very individual. The need for advice is super important. The other one to think about is the PCLS, tax-free cash. Will it be right for some people to draw tax-free cash and do some planning with it? I think it probably will. Into that need, we've recently launched a flexible reversionary trust, which works rather like a discounted gift trust, where a client could take their tax-free cash, for example, gift it into the trust, set a series of payments that come back to them, but those payments are flexible, so they can take them if they want, or the trustees can waive them or defer them to a future date. So it gives them the flexibility to make a gift, but have access to an income stream. But if they don't need that income stream, they can just keep rolling it down the road and potentially never touching it. And you only make one gift. So you make one gift into trust. Deferring and waiving the income streams is not treated as a further gift. So again, that's lots of conversation is happening within our teams around that. It's an interesting opportunity. And again, if you want to talk some more, please do get in touch with either myself, Kat, or your usual contact. And as I said, inheritance tax, I think, will be a really, really big deal following both budgets, in fact, an opportunity to think about what does it look like, not just from a tax perspective, but what does it look like from a human perspective? How do I pass money to the next generation? How do I make sure they use things in the way that they want to? Do I really want to send my grandson off to Freshers Week with £100,000 in his bank account? Perhaps, but I certainly wouldn't. What does that look like for people? How do we manage those things? And I think trust planning will be a really interesting opportunity and a real need, both in lifetime and on death. Lifetime trusts and will trusts will become a real opportunity, because I think the consideration for a lot of wealthier clients will be, I actually need to gift more than I thought I would have done previously as a result of the legislative changes, which that's one thing. How do I work that through in practice? What about divorce? What about bankruptcy? What about reckless beneficiaries? How do I make sure that the money is used in the way that it could or should be? And I think trusts are a great way to kind of control that, but also just give certainty to clients that they don't need to worry that something's going to be lost. And they also need to think about their intergenerational strategy. Now, I know in Britain we're pretty poor at that. Wealth and money and finances is somewhat of a taboo subject. And I had some interesting conversations with an ex-colleague of mine who's from Boston, how in America they don't have the same reserve that we have around money, and it's quite common for even relatively wealthy families to have a family wealth meeting, for want of a better word, which is often chaired by the financial planner. Well, they'll all talk about, this is a family wealth, this is the expectation in terms of how it's used, this is what we've gone through to build that wealth, and this is how we'd like it to be, to be utilized throughout the generations. So they're really open, right? And I think, getting past the British Reserve is one thing, but that's a brilliant piece of opportunity to add real value, I think. And then the final one, as I said, is a really personal one to a lot of people, which is, I know I probably should do some gifting, but what happens if? How do I know? What if I run out of money? What if? Again, I was talking to a planner not that long ago who has a client who keeps £1 million in cash just in case. He's retired, he's got DB pension schemes, plenty of surplus income, but he does it, even though we'd probably sit and think that's a crazy thing to do, but that's what provides security to him. So I think helping on that journey is really important. Things like cash flow modeling, building tools to show them actually if you gave this money away, you could live to 100 and not run out. Things like, as I said, some of the trust ranges like the flexible reversionary trust that gives them the option. If you need it, the money can come back to you. If you don't, and you probably don't, we can pass that along. So I think getting comfortable with trust planning is going to be a big part of the next couple of years. So we've covered quite a lot over the last 40 minutes, and I know I appreciate I've kind of thrown lots out there, but hopefully we've given a good overview of the 2025 budget changes. Think about some of the impact on financial plans, particularly including the 2024 budget, and looked at some planning ideas to support you through the changes. And so all leaves me to say is thank you very much for A, inviting us along, and B, taking time out of your doubtless busy diaries to jump on the call. And genuinely, we're here to support you as much as you can. So if there's things you need from us, if you want to continue the conversation around any of the trusts or any of the support we do, please do. Please do get in touch. I'm going to hand back to Kat now, who is going to close.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Simon. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's given people a lot of things to think about. We've had a couple of people reach out for follow-up calls, which we will arrange. Just wanted to give everyone a chance to ask any further questions. If there are any further questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or put your hand up. And while we give everyone a minute or two to do that, I just want to say we do have some of our account managers on the call who are specifically aligned to Julian Harris, so they can then follow up on this webinar to expand on the conversations that you might want to, discuss following what Simon has presented to you today. We do have a full suite of products on our platform, so to complement the ideas that Simon has discussed, we've got our flexible ISA, our pension portfolio, and our new onshore bond, which was launched last year. And to go alongside our onshore bond, we have a full range of trusts, including our new flexible reversionary trust. So if there's anybody that wants to discuss that further and how we can, the Aviva platform can meet your clients' needs, then our account managers will be happy to reach out and discuss that with you. And if you haven't yet heard about our onshore bond or a flexible reversionary trust, then they're happy to discuss that with you also. I don't see any more questions coming into the chat, but if there are, then our account managers are on hand to follow this up if you do have any further questions. And we are all working with Simon with his technical expertise. So, thank you for your support, Simon, on that. He is on hand if there is anything complex you want to discuss. And I'm on hand. I work alongside Mohan to support the network. So from a strategic point of view, if there's anything that would benefit you and the whole network in terms of what our proposition can provide you with, then happy to have a conversation on that also. I don't think we have any questions cropping up, but thank you all for your time today. It's been good to be able to provide you with this technical content at the start of the year, and hopefully it's given you lots of things to think about, lots of opportunities to explore, and we look forward to working with you throughout the year.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Catherine. Really appreciate this. We really enjoyed your webinar, and we'll be sharing that with all the other advisors as well. Thank you.
Thanks,
Lovely.
everyone. See you
Thank
soon.
you, Mohan.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.